Good morning. It's Beth McGrain-Tran from Women Created and Called Coaching, and I wanted to come on here today and talk to you a little bit about Lent. It's coming up in one day. It's tomorrow. 2 days. I forgot what day it was for a second. Today is Monday, and we start Lent on Ash Wednesday, this Wednesday of this week. So today, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about something that I call two sides of an ugly coin. And I was thinking about this the other day, and I thought sometimes I've noticed this come up in me, and I think I've seen it in some other people too. Sometimes we might have a tendency to think, maybe my Lent's can be better than your Lent. And we can actually find ourselves comparing the way that we go about observing our Lent. And maybe we might not say it to the person, but we might think it in our minds. We might think, oh, that person is doing that, and maybe I should be doing that. Or the thing that I'm doing isn't good enough. Or the thing that they're doing isn't good enough. It can happen. So I was thinking about this, and I actually wrote a little bit of a reflection about it. And so I hope you don't mind. I'm going to be reading a little bit today. It's not very long, I promise. But, you know, I was wondering that question. Have you ever found yourself comparing your sacrifice, maybe it's Lent or maybe it's outside of Lent, your sacrifice, you've been sacrificing in some way, with another's sacrifice? Or have you even tried to one-up them, thinking that your sacrifice would make you holier than theirs will make them? Or maybe you have found yourself comparing your hardships in life with their stories of suffering. Comparison and competition like that are not always a bad thing. Sometimes we can use comparison and competition in a healthy way. But when it looks like this, like I'm describing here, it can get really ugly. So let's examine both sides of that ugly coin, as I mentioned. Now, on one side, we find pride. And pride is what causes us to look at others, compare ourselves to them, and think that we are better in some way. The way that I'm doing it is better in some way. And I'm not talking about an objective kind of better, but, you know, the kind of better that could be displayed in a healthy competition, like I said. But we're examining the ugly coin, remember? So I'm talking about the kind where we see others doing something good, and instead of celebrating their goodness, we need to cut them down somehow so that we can stay just one step above them. Maybe this looks like something like this. I see they've raised lots of funds for charity, but I'm going to make sure that we raise more so we can have the recognition of being the best. Sure. That charity may be getting lots of donations, and they're going to benefit from this little ugly competition, but the hearts of the organizer in that scenario is tainted with pride. Remember, the end does not justify the means. So let's look at the flip side of that ugly coin. There we find the extreme opposite of pride, and that is not humility. Sometimes we think that humility is the opposite of pride, but it's not. The extreme opposite is self-loathing, and that is what happens when we look at the goodness of others. Again, instead of celebrating, we compare only focusing on how we will never measure up to them. And like I said, this is not the same as humility, and I'll tell you why in a moment. This kind of comparison usually leads to a why bother attitude, not to mention depression and despair. So instead of doing something good, we end up doing nothing. And so that does not end up getting us where we want to be either. So notice both sides of this ugly coin, as I call it, are focused on the self, centered on the self. I am better than them, or I am never going to measure up to them. It's looking at the self. So it's so important that all of us who want to do good in the world and build God's kingdom watch out for this trap that we can so easily fall into. So, what's the solution? The middle ground between these two extremes. And that is true humility. My favorite simple definition of humility is seeing yourself exactly as God sees you. No more and no less. I'm going to say that one more time. True humility is seeing yourself exactly the way that God sees you. No more and no less. So what does that look like? In order to really understand what that true humility is, what that looks like, it takes knowing that God calls every one of us to do good and to be a mirror of His love in the world. And also, we can't do it on our own. His grace makes it possible. But if I'm going to be a mirror, and actually be that mirror as opposed to maybe holding one up, that means that the way that I reflect God's love to others is going to be unique. If I'm the mirror, I'm a unique mirror. So when I look at others and I see the good that they're doing, I can celebrate them and even lift them up as another example, another mirror of God's love. Because they're doing what God has called them to do. And that is, like I said, doing good in the world. Sometimes looking at others, the trash truck is coming. Perfect timing. Sometimes looking at what others is doing is helpful because it can inspire me to get into action, to answer God's call to love. But as I do that, a frequent heart check is helpful. So what's a heart check? It's something like asking yourself, what is my motivation and my intentions here? Am I trying to do this good thing like that other person did? Or am I approaching it in a way that is unique to me, based on the gifts that God has given me to work with? As I said at the beginning, Lent is coming soon, in a couple of days. And here in this season, we're given another opportunity to do good and to clean up our hearts so that we can be a better mirror. Break out the spiritual Windex. But watch out for that trap of comparing your Windex to someone else's Windex. The how of this Lent is a formula that's unique to you. And when you choose a way to observe the season with God's greater vision for your life in mind, then you can create a plan that has impact on the rest of your life well beyond the Lenten season. And that is how you have a Lent that changes everything. I can help you with that. You may know that tomorrow, on Tuesday morning, I am having a Create Your Lenten Roadmap workshop. It will start at 11 a.m. Eastern, and it's totally free. And I want to invite you to go ahead and RSVP for that workshop. I will leave the link in the description of this video. But as I said in the description, there's a second part to this video that I wanted to include. And that is the very first step for what we're going to cover in that workshop. So if you have already RSVP'd, fantastic, keep watching. This is your pre-workshop homework. If you have not RSVP'd yet, still listen up, because this is going to help you prepare for your Lenten season, whether you join us for the workshop or not. But I do encourage you that after you hear this first step, then you go and you RSVP for the workshop. And I will, again, I'll leave that link in the description. So the very first step to prepare for Lent is to seek God's will, as I mentioned earlier. Seek God's will for your life, seek God's vision for your life. So in order to do this, I want you to think about it in this way. To know what someone wants, it helps to know that person. And how do we get to know a person? We spend time with them. So if we want to get to know God's will, we spend time with Him. And that is prayer. Prayer is simply spending time with God, having a conversation. That is simply it. It's being aware that God is in your presence, that you are with God at any time of the day, any moment, He's there with you. So what's so cool is that there are so many different ways to pray, because it can simply be turning your attention to God, like I said, at any time of the day, any moment. That being said, those little moments are wonderful, and we should also try to have intentional moments where we make ourselves available to get really quiet and have the kind of conversation with God that is free from distraction as much as possible. I know some of you are really busy moms, and this part could be challenging, and yet I challenge you to do it because it will make all the difference, I promise. So prayer is simply that conversation with God. Now, even if you feel like it's been a while, like maybe you haven't prayed very much lately, or it's been a really long while, or you just kind of feel like you don't really know God very well. That is not a problem. I promise that He knows you even better than anyone, including yourself. And that's because He made you. So you can start in this prayer by thanking Him for all of the good in your life. All of the good in the world, all of the good that you see around you, all good comes from God. So You can start by thanking him. Then bring everything that is weighing on your heart. Bring it to him, lay it all out, say, here is what's really bugging me right now. And I promise you, he can take it. Even if you're mad at God for any reason. I understand what that's like. And I promise you, he can take it. So, everything that is bugging you, everything that's on your heart, the good, the bad, the ugly, lay it all out. And then ask God what he thinks about all of these different situations that are weighing on your heart right now. So ask what he thinks and what he wants for you in those situations. And trust that his plan comes from perfect love. So you can trust that plan. It's going to be better than you can imagine, better than, that's it, better than your wildest imagination. God's plan is the best. Then the next step is to listen. What are the thoughts that are coming to you in that moment? And really pay attention to what thoughts are coming. And at this point in the process, we're not necessarily judging and discerning quite yet whether we think that those thoughts are from God or not. Right now, this is a step of awareness. This is a step of intentionally placing yourself in God's presence, having that prayer time with as little distraction as possible, and then really opening yourself up to receive what God wants to tell you. And like I said, just write down everything that comes to you. It's super important because you will need to refer back to it. And sometimes thoughts might come up that might surprise you. And if that's the case, you definitely want to have it written down, because if it's a surprise to you, your brain might dismiss it and you might totally forget about it, even though that could be God calling you to something unexpected. So the other thing that I want you to notice about the thoughts during this part of the process is check to see if those thoughts that are coming sound like conviction or condemning. God's voice will convict, but not condemn. Now, what's the difference? The difference is conviction will move you to action for good. Condemning will accuse and shame and not move you to action. When it's condemning, it actually creates feelings and actions that will kind of leave you stuck and frozen and not knowing how to move forward. So that's the difference. Conviction will help you move forward. Condemning will do the opposite. So that's basically the very first step. If you go through this process, and then what you're asking, then from this beginning part, this beginning step, you are going to ask God, what do you want for my life? And sometimes it's helpful, instead of thinking about the overwhelming idea of your whole life, at least, God, what do you want for this season in my life? And he's gonna help you know what that is. He really will. Being open to receiving, excuse me, the inspiration of the Holy Spirit is huge. That's a big, big part of being able to hear God's voice and know what his will is. And so when we can learn how to be open and be predisposed to receiving God's voice. So when I say predisposed, that means that you're both open and expecting to hear from God. You're just walking around kind of in that state of mind almost all the time. It's your normal disposition. So anyway, I hope that this has been helpful. Like I said, if you want to just take, this first step and you think, okay, I'm there, I've already done that, I'm good, that's fantastic. And then in the workshop tomorrow, we are going to continue from there. We're going to get into what kinds of things can come up that can block our ability to receive God's grace and really hear his will for our lives. So we're going to talk about grace blockers. We're also going to talk about discernment. So I said at this point, you're just writing everything down. But then tomorrow we're going to talk about, okay, how do you then look at these different things and discern whether that is God's voice? And I'm going to help you narrow it down so that you're really just looking at two different things. And then from there, we're going to distill it down and help you create that roadmap for your Lenten season so that you can act on it. And I'm going to talk to you about how you can stay committed to the actions that you choose, that you decide on, that you're going to use as your observation for the Lenten season. And then how you can stay committed to those, hopefully you've created some new habits maybe over the season. And how can you stay committed to those even beyond the Lenten season? So that's some of the things that we're going to cover in the workshop tomorrow. Remember, it's the Create Your Lenten Roadmap workshop. It starts at 11 o'clock tomorrow morning. And in order to get access, you need to RSVP so that I can send you the link to join us on Zoom. And even if you are not able to join us live, I will send out a replay, but I promise you are going to get the most benefit from this workshop if you are on there live with us, because you'll have a chance to bounce your ideas off. I can coach you on it a little bit if that's what you want, and I can help you create that roadmap. So go to the link in the description and make sure you RSVP for the workshop tomorrow. And happy preparation for Lent, everybody. It's just about upon us. And I will see you at the workshop tomorrow. Thank you for joining me. Bye.